Historically, the Persian Empire once ruled the world. A vast expanse of power stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, where 60 nations bowed beneath a single banner. But empires eventually crumble, dynasties rise and fall, and that land, Iran, through thousands of years of conquest, reshaping, and renaming, has never ceased to be the epicenter of a power far greater than itself. Today, the entire weight of that historical tide converges upon a strait only 21 miles wide. It is almost inconceivable that a mere 21 miles of water carries nearly 20% of the global oil supply. More than just a geographical boundary. This is a fatal intersection where human ambitions for power and the violent tremors of the earth collide with immense pressure. In a space where every movement is scrutinized by the world's master strategists. Even the slightest fracture in its operation could trigger a catastrophe, turning the prosperity of nations into ash in a single moment of disruption. They call it the jugular vein of humanity. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Positioned 5 miles off the coast of Bandar Abbas at the threshold of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage through which roughly a fifth of the world's traded oil moves each day, Hormuz Island commands a geography that makes it simultaneously one of the most strategically watched and geologically surreal places on Earth. The island is a salt diapir, a 600-million-year-old mass of compressed salt and mineral-rich volcanic rock pressing upward through overlying sediment over the last 50,000 years, folding iron oxide, hematite, gypsum, and volcanic compounds into more than 70 distinct mineral shades. Deep crimson cliffs, silver-black beaches ground from crystallized hematite. Purple canyon walls and golden riverbeds carved dry since before recorded history. This landscape does not look unreal because it is untouched. It looks unreal because the forces that built it are still active, still reshaping the surface that 3,000 people have decided to call home. For those residents, mostly Sunni fishermen, whose dialect carries traces of Portuguese, Arabic, Hindi, and Dutch, absorbed across centuries of competing occupation. That geology is not spectacle, but daily material. Women grind the red ochre soil, locally called gelak, into a spice that colors stews and flavors bread, turning mineral survival directly into culinary identity. The Portuguese fort, built from that same red stone in 1507, still stands on the northern shore, its walls dissolving back into the landscape they were quarried from. As if the island has always been in the process of reclaiming what empires attempted to fix in place. Today, warming Gulf temperatures bleach the offshore coral reefs, while a growing tourism economy gradually erodes the very geological formations that drew visitors here. A contradiction Hormuz has always understood. What is worth preserving is precisely what refuses to stay still. Places like Hormuz remind us that the most ancient materials on Earth are not the most stable, and that the communities who learned to live with them understood something about impermanence that the rest of the world is only beginning to grasp. Somewhere beyond the northern cliffs, through the same 21-mile passage, Hormuz has watched across every century of its existence. 20 million barrels of oil move daily. A volume of extracted wealth so immense that its transit defines the geopolitical architecture of the entire modern Middle East. And from which this island, positioned at the precise center of that transit, receives nothing except the view. That absence is not incidental. The same salt diapir that folded 70 shades of mineral color into the surface also saturated the soil and groundwater to the point of complete biological unusability, meaning every liter of drinking water arrives by boat or desalination plant. A structural dependency that functions as a permanent surcharge on the act of living here, one that no geological spectacle has ever cancelled. The fishermen who work these inshore waters before sunrise understand a second arithmetic: the landscape does not advertise. The Gulf their fathers fished is not the Gulf they work now. Its stocks compressed by industrial trawling and by water temperatures that have shifted the seasonal catch beyond the reach of small boat households. The red ochre, the same galak, ground into cooking pots before dawn. Has been placed under extraction restriction, the intervention arriving not as protection, but as the removal of the last resource the island could sell without leaving it. By midsummer, the population drops by nearly half, not because of tourism, but because the working-age residents have left for wages the island cannot generate. a departure that repeats itself each year with the quiet regularity of a tide, leaving behind the very young, the very old, and the landscape itself, which continues producing its colors indifferently, requiring nothing from anyone, as it has for 600 million years. That investing stretching 96 miles along the northern edge of the Strait of Hormuz and covering more than 575 square miles. A surface area larger than Bahrain and Singapore combined. Qeshm is the largest island in Iran and the only UNESCO Global Geopark in the Middle East, a designation earned not through administrative ambition, but through geological necessity. The island sits at the collision boundary of the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates. A 25 million year compression that has folded sedimentary rock over sliding salt layers and produced a landscape that simultaneously presents the interior of a salt cathedral, a canyon carved with ancient water wells, and a mangrove forest thick enough to shelter nesting flamingos from the open Gulf. Namakdan's Salt Cave, the longest salt cave on Earth at more than 4 miles in extent, was formed within a salt dome whose root reaches 12 miles below the surface. And its crystalline interior, pink, crimson, cobalt, contains formations older than the Cambrian period, older than most terrestrial life itself. For the 148,000 people who live on Qeshm, the landscape is not a geological exhibition, but the foundation of a working life. The island's boat builders still practice Lenge construction, a UNESCO-designated intangible heritage craft in which ocean-going wooden vessels are assembled entirely from memory without blueprints, using techniques transmitted across generations of seafarers who once connected this coast to India, East Africa, and China. The Bandari dialect, spoken here, carries trace vocabularies from Portuguese, Arabic, Hindi, and Swahili, each layer deposited by a different century of maritime contact. Women wear the borga, a beaked mask covering the lower face. Not as ornament, but as functional sun protection, developed over centuries of open water work in an environment where UV exposure and salt wind are constant occupational conditions. Qeshm became this way through two kinds of force, geological and imperial. The island's position at the convergence point of two marine ecosystems the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman made it a target for every power that understood what the strait controlled. The tension it now faces is simultaneous. Rising Gulf temperatures bleach its coral reefs. Tourism infrastructure strains a geopark whose protected status depends on minimal intervention. And the Lenge craft is slowly losing the next generation of builders to mainland employment. Places like Qeshm remind us that scale and antiquity do not guarantee survival. And that the most complete records of geological time are often the most fragile when measured against the pace of a single human generation. Positioned just 3 miles from the international shipping lane, through which an estimated 21 million barrels of oil transit daily, Larak is the smallest of the 3 strategic islands flanking the Strait of Hormuz, smaller than Hormuz, quieter than Kish. And sufficiently close to the principal tanker route that its elevated position functions as a natural observation platform over one of the most economically critical water passages on the planet. The island is rocky and steep, rising abruptly from the Gulf's shallow, warm floor. Its shoreline dropping into water that retains equatorial heat long enough each year to produce one of the strait's most disorienting natural phenomena, bioluminescence. On still nights, from late summer through autumn, phytoplankton concentrated near the surface by the Gulf's restricted circulation produce waves of cold, blue-green light that replicate the motion of the sea in pure luminescence. A coast that generates its own illumination without any input from the grid or from the moon. For the small fishing community that has always worked this island, the biology of the glowing water is inseparable from practical life. The density of bioluminescent bloom correlates with warm, still conditions that also concentrate the schooling fish on which night fishing boats depend, making the light both spectacle and signal. Homes here are built from compacted earth and coral aggregate, constructed with walls thick enough to manage the extreme thermal swing between December nights that can reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit and August days that regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit. A thermal range that requires architectural response rather than mechanical climate control. Larak entered strategic significance early Portuguese navigational charts from the 16th century, identify it as a waypoint for vessels crossing from Hormuz to Muscat. And that significance has never diminished. Today, its proximity to sensitive strategic infrastructure limits development and tourism alike, preserving by strategic restriction what other Gulf islands have lost to commercial pressure. Its reefs remain largely intact. Its bioluminescent density is undiluted by coastal light pollution, and its fishing community continues operating within boundaries set not by tradition alone, but by the same geopolitical logic that has always determined who is allowed to approach this shore. Places like Larak remind us that invisibility is sometimes the condition that best preserves what visibility destroys. Separated from Qeshm's southern coast by just 1.2 miles of Gulf water, Hangam occupies only 13 square miles of terrain, rises to a maximum of 348 feet above sea level, and supports no paved roads, no hotels, and fewer than 650 permanent residents. A settlement pattern that has remained largely unchanged across several centuries of Persian, Portuguese, and British territorial contests. What makes Hangam geologically distinctive within the Hormuz archipelago is a 3-1-mile coastal perimeter where phyllosilicate mineral deposits in the sand catch and scatter sunlight with enough intensity that the beach reads as metallic at low tide, silver, and then near white as the angle shifts, a surface that appears manufactured rather than geological. After dark, phytoplankton blooms in the bay produce the same bioluminescent glow found near Larak, a cold blue light drawn across the water by the movement of waves. For the fishermen and artisan households of Hangam, adaptation to this environment has produced a specific cultural economy. Women here are among the only female fisherwomen in the Persian Gulf, setting out before dawn in small wooden boats to work lines targeting barracuda and spangled emperor fish. While shore-based artisans convert shell waste into jewelry sold through one of the Gulf's last entirely traditional island bazaars. The Zar ceremony, a ritual of hypnotic drumming and collective trance practiced along this entire coastal region. Is still performed here as a method of collective psychological recalibration under conditions of isolation and environmental stress. A practice that predates formal medicine's arrival by centuries. The contemporary pressure Hangam faces is ecological. Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins that congregate in the bay between Hangam and Qeshm from autumn through spring are increasingly disturbed by tour boat traffic during peak season. A pattern that correlates with declining surface approach frequency. The Silver Beach has been placed under visitor restriction following mineral extraction by tourists who misidentified the phyllosilicate sand as a collectible. Places like Hangam remind us that the most precise ecological archives are often held by communities too small to appear on most maps, yet too embedded in their environment to be replaced by anything that comes after them. Located 12 miles off Iran's southern coast, Kish is a nearly elliptical coral island covering 35 square miles with an average elevation barely above Gulf sea level and a climate defined by one overriding reality: the Persian Gulf traps and retains heat with the efficiency of a shallow thermal basin, producing summer air temperatures that regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit and a year-round humidity that makes the island feel enclosed rather than open. A landscape of brilliant turquoise water and bone-white coral sand that sits inside atmospheric conditions more closely resembling a greenhouse than a shoreline. Beneath the island, running 52 feet underground, lies Karis, a 2,500-year-old qanat system, originally constructed to filter rainwater through successive layers of fossil coral and clay, purifying it by mineral contact alone before delivering it as drinking water to a population that had no other freshwater source. The ceiling of this subterranean channel is composed of fossilized coral reef material dated by Munich University researchers to between 53 and 570 million years old. A stratum that records, in stone biology, the history of the seafloor on which the entire island now rests. The people who built the qanat understood an engineering principle that modern desalination plants reproduce at enormous energy cost. That the geometry of coral filtration, given sufficient depth and time, produces water pure enough to sustain a city. Above that, underground infrastructure, a succession of civilizations built and abandoned Harire. A trading city from the 8th century CE whose coral stone ruins still stand on the island's northern edge. And then rebuilt commercial life entirely, most recently in 1992, when Kish was designated Iran's first free trade zone. The Greek cargo ship Cooler F, built in Scotland in 1943, and finally run aground on Kish's southwest reef on the 25th of July, 1966. Has not been moved since, its rusting 446-foot hull sitting in shallow turquoise water at sunset, a structure that looks, depending on the light, like the remains of empire or the beginning of a reef. The tension Kish now navigates is between two layers of its own identity. An island whose 2,000 500-year-old water system represents one of the most elegant, low-energy engineering solutions in history. And a free trade zone that receives 12 million visitors annually, each arriving with demands that the Khanate was never designed to accommodate. Places like Kish remind us that the infrastructure of survival and the infrastructure of consumption occupy the same ground, and that the distance between the two is rarely as comfortable as it appears from the surface. Positioned 112 miles west of Bandar Abbas in the open Persian Gulf, far enough from the Strait of Hormuz to escape its institutional density, Lavan is a low-lying island of 17 square miles, whose geology a compressed anticline of limestone and evaporite. Places it directly above some of the Gulf's most productive hydrocarbon reservoirs. Its landscape is constituted by the contradiction this creates. Chinkara gazelles move freely along beaches of pale, compressed coral sand beside holding tanks, pipelines, and the infrastructure of Iran's offshore oil refining operations, a visual juxtaposition so extreme that it renders the conventional categories of natural and industrial landscape functionally meaningless. The Gulf here is warm enough through most of the year to support coral reef systems directly adjacent to the refinery's marine outfall. A resilience that is less reassuring than it sounds. For the community that inhabited Lavan before the oil economy defined its function, the island was something else entirely. A center of pearl diving so significant that its Bandari-speaking divers were known across the Gulf trade network for their lung capacity and their ability to read the bottom topography of the pearl beds without instruments. That economy collapsed definitively in the 1930s, when Japanese cultured pearl technology eliminated the commercial rationale for natural pearl diving. Across the entire Gulf, and what replaced it on Lavan specifically was not transition, but substitution. The same geographic position and the same deep water access transferred wholesale to the logic of offshore oil extraction. The daily reality of life on Lavan now moves in shifts. Refinery workers rotating through assignments from the mainland. Fishermen working the open Gulf beyond the refinery's exclusion zones. And a dwindling older generation whose oral knowledge of the pearl beds has no institutional home and no market application. Places like Lavan remind us that the geography that makes a place valuable to others is rarely the geography that made it worth living in. Located in the eastern Persian Gulf, within Hormozgan province, Shidvar is an uninhabited island whose coral sand, beaches, and water clarity are superficially indistinguishable from the private resort imagery that defines high-end Gulf tourism marketing. Except that Shidvar has no resort, no jetty, no overnight infrastructure, and no human community. A condition maintained not by regulation alone, but by a population of Persian horned viper, dense enough that the island acquired its colloquial name Snake Island from mariners who learned. Across generations of navigational trial, that the beach that looks most accessible is also the most occupied. The vipers are not aggressive by disposition, but are abundant enough and the island is small enough that landing without professional preparation translates directly to envenomation risk. A biological security system more effective than most administrative ones. That biological defense is precisely what preserved the ecological conditions that make Shidvar internationally significant. The island is registered as a Ramsar wetland site and functions as one of the most critical nesting grounds for the hawksbill sea turtle in the Persian Gulf. A species listed as critically endangered globally, whose nesting success depends specifically on undisturbed beach access during the laying season. The same beaches that the vipers defend from casual human incursion are the beaches that the turtles return to annually from distances of hundreds of miles. Navigating by magnetic field to the specific latitude and longitude where they themselves were hatched. A fidelity to origin that requires the nesting site to remain structurally unchanged across decades. The contemporary pressure facing Shidvar is not from tourism, but from warming Gulf waters that are progressively altering the thermal gradients that determine sea turtle sex ratios during incubation. As Gulf temperatures rise, the proportion of female hatchlings increases. A biological response to thermal excess that, if sustained, will eventually skew the population beyond the threshold of reproductive viability. Places like Shidvar remind us that the most effective form of conservation is the one that required no human decision to begin. And that the most dangerous future belongs to places we never thought we needed to manage. Sitting between the provinces of East and West Azerbaijan in northwestern Iran, Lake Urmia was once the second largest hypersaline lake on Earth, an 7-mile-long inland sea, occupying 2,000 square miles of the Iranian plateau at an elevation of 4,180 feet above sea level. And is now, depending on the season, either a shallow red brine or a white salt flat so extensive it is visible from low Earth orbit, having lost more than 90% of its water volume since the mid-1990s through a combination of upstream dam construction, agricultural diversion, reduced precipitation, and accelerating evaporation. What remains visible in satellite imagery is one of the most literal color metaphors in contemporary environmental science. When spring snowmelt from the surrounding Zagros ranges temporarily restores freshwater input, the lake turns deep green. When summer heat and upstream diversion reduce it again, increased salinity triggers a bloom of Dunaliella salina. A salt-adapted microalga that produces carotenoid pigments as a photoprotective response, turning the entire remaining water body blood red, a process documented in NASA imagery and described as a biological warning signal encoded directly in color. For the communities of the Azerbaijan plateaus whose agricultural economies have depended on Lake Urmia's water table for more than 3 millennia, the lake's decline is not environmental news, but lived reality. The black therapeutic mud that once drew visitors from across the region for its proven anti-inflammatory properties is now accessible not by boat to mid-lake sandbars, but by walking across a dry salt crust that extends for miles. Former marinas stand on white salt plains, boat docks end in air, and the brine shrimp, Artemia urmiana, an almost endemic crustacean that form the base of the lake's food web, exists in densities too reduced to sustain the flamingo, pelican, and shorebird populations that historically defined the lake's ecological identity. Lake Urmia did not decline by accident. Its trajectory followed the same infrastructure logic that has reduced the Aral Sea, the Dead Sea, and dozens of endorheic lakes globally. Dams built for agricultural development blocked 14 of the 16 rivers that fed the basin. Irrigation canals diverted what remained for wheat and grape cultivation, and a 6-lane highway causeway built across the lake's center in 2008 disrupted the already restricted circulation between the northern and southern basins. Accelerating salinity stratification in ways that were understood by hydrologists before construction began. The $1.3 billion Urmia Lake Restoration Program launched in 2013 with joint funding from the Iranian government, UNDP, and the government of Japan. has produced partial, unstable results. Above-average precipitation years temporarily replenished the lake, offering satellite imagery that appeared to show recovery. But modeling indicates that even full implementation of all restoration measures may be insufficient to return the lake to its pre-1990s surface area, because some geomorphological changes are now irreversible. Places like Urmia remind us that the most ancient natural systems are not the most resilient. They are often the most sensitive, and that the first sign of collapse is almost never the moment it becomes impossible to reverse. Do you think you already know the Strait of Hormuz? You believe it is nothing more than a tense geopolitical coordinate, a suffocating choke point on the global energy map, because that is the only version the media has ever shown you. But have you ever imagined how a small, barren island, where temperatures can melt human will and fresh water is more precious than gold, became the center of imperial ambition for centuries? Why were some of history's most renowned explorers, from Marco Polo to Afonso de Albuquerque, willing to risk their lives just to set foot on this strip of salt-scorched land? Forget the headlines of the daily news. Hormuz is not a dry military outpost. It is a place where mountains of salt rise from the earth in colors like a rainbow, where deep red clay canyons resembling the surface of Mars collapse straight into the dark blue of the Persian Gulf. It is a civilization that survives not because of natural abundance, but because of its ability to transform harshness into a form of art. An island where the land itself tells stories, where salt is not just a mineral but the backbone of identity and pride. Here, power is not measured by weapons, but by the ability to endure under burning heat and the isolation of the sea. This is not the tense strait you have heard about. This is a surreal world where nature and history collide to create something unlike anywhere else on Earth. This is Unreal Hormuz. The Persian Gulf is, by most conventional ecological measures, an environment in which coral reef systems should not be able to function. Summer water temperatures regularly reach 96 degrees Fahrenheit. a level at which corals in virtually every other part of the world experience mass bleaching and death, unable to sustain the symbiotic algae that give them both color and the majority of their nutritional needs. The reefs around Hormuz Island and the Strait's peripheral islands not only survive these temperatures, they have over thousands of years of exposure to the Gulf's extreme thermal cycling, developed a degree of heat tolerance that represents one of the most significant cases of adaptive evolution in modern marine biology. These corals carry, encoded in their biology, information about how reef systems can persist where persistence should be impossible. For the dive communities, marine biologists, and fishermen who work in relationship with the Strait's reefs, their existence is both a resource and a reference point. The reefs support more than 700 fish species, sustaining the protein supply of coastal communities across the northern Gulf Coast. Their presence defines where fish aggregate, where nets are set, and where traditional fishing grounds have been maintained across generations. The Gulf's coral reefs became heat-tolerant through thousands of years of thermal exposure that killed less resilient individuals and left, as survivors, those whose physiology could accommodate extremity. This is evolution operating in visible, comprehensible time. The current threat is more rapid than adaptation can match. Oil contamination from tanker traffic, runoff from coastal development, and military activity in the reef zones all impose pressures for which no biological adjustment exists. Places like the Hormuz Reefs remind us that survival is not a metaphor. It is a mechanism, and mechanisms can be broken. Along the southern and southeastern shoreline of Qeshm Island, the Hara forest covers approximately 30 square miles of tidal channels. And mudflats in a dense growth of Avicennia marina, a species of mangrove that has evolved a physiological solution to one of nature's more fundamental contradictions: how to grow in water that would kill almost any other plant. The Hara trees filter salt through their root systems, expelling it through their leaves in visible crystals, sustaining themselves in an environment of near-total salinity through a biological mechanism refined across millions of years. From the air, the forest reads as a dark green labyrinth pressed against the Gulf's blue edge. From within, at water level in a narrow boat, it is something closer to enclosure. The light filtered through dense canopy, the silence punctuated by the movement of birds that use the forest as a stopover on migrations spanning continents. For the fishermen who work the Hara channels, the forest is a production system, not a wilderness. It generates the nutrient conditions that support the shrimp and fish populations of the surrounding Gulf, functioning as a nursery for species that eventually move into deeper water and into nets. The communities that have fished these channels for generations developed harvesting patterns calibrated to the forest's seasonal rhythms, taking from it without exceeding what it could regenerate. The Hara forest became this dense through centuries of undisturbed tidal cycling in a gulf that was, until recently, relatively free of industrial pressure. Today, it faces oil contamination from tanker traffic, warming water temperatures that stress the trees, and the increasing frequency of extreme heat events. What happens when the nursery of a sea is compromised is not an environmental abstraction. It is the direct elimination of a food system that coastal communities depend upon for daily survival. Places like Hara remind us that the most essential infrastructure is often the least visible. Rising from the Persian Gulf approximately 5 miles off the coast of Bandar Abbas, Hormuz Island spreads across roughly 18 square miles of some of the most geologically theatrical terrain on the planet. And yet, it is inseparable, in both geography and consequence, from the narrow corridor of water that surrounds it. A passage barely 21 miles across at its tightest point, through which the energy architecture of modern civilization flows each day without pause or guarantee. The island's mountains do not merely stand, they perform, layered in bands of iron oxide red, sulfuric yellow, salt white, and violet, stacked in formations that reflect 570 million years of compression, uplift, and mineral transformation beneath a sun that allows no shadow to soften what the rock is trying to say. While below them, supercarriers, the length of 4 city blocks, move through shipping lanes barely 2 miles wide in each direction, carrying approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil daily, representing 20% of the world's entire supply. Their wakes disturbing the same iron-rich coastline where the island bleeds its red mineral runoff slowly and without urgency into the Gulf. For the people who live within this dual reality, neither the geology nor the geopolitics registers as extraordinary. The same iron-rich clay that colors the coastline, known locally as Larak, is incorporated into the local diet, mixed into a sauce called surak, pressed into flatbread, traded as a seasoning across the southern coast. While the marine pilots and small boat fishermen who share the strait's congested lanes, treat the passage not as a symbol of global tension, but as a working environment defined by current, draft, and the particular alertness required when survival depends on reading the water correctly. This is a place where the most intimate human relationship with landscape, pressing the Earth's minerals into food, navigating its waters by inherited knowledge, coexists with the most abstract global dependency, where a community's daily sustenance and the financial stability of entire economies occupy the same narrow geography without ever quite acknowledging each other. Hormuz became this layered contradiction through processes operating at entirely different scales. The salt dome tectonics and desert erosion that produce the island's impossible colors over hundreds of millions of years and the coincidence of geology and empire that formalized the strait as a choke point when industrial civilization built its energy infrastructure around Gulf reserves. Today, both pressures intensify simultaneously. The island's fragile soil and limited fresh water straining under the weight of the attention its visual power has attracted, while the strait carries not just oil, but the compounded anxiety of every economy that depends on it remaining open. Places like this remind us that the world's most vivid beauty and the world's most fragile stability have always had more in common than either headline or postcard suggests. Stretching approximately 87 miles along the northern edge of the strait, Qeshm is the largest island in the Persian Gulf, salt-scarred, wind-polished, and carrying its scale without grandeur. Temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, and the humidity rising from the Gulf makes the air feel less like something breathed than something worn against the skin without consent. For the people who live here, this extremity is the organizing principle of everything. The day does not follow the clock, it follows the heat. Before sunrise, when the air briefly releases its grip, the island stirs into concentrated activity. Fishermen push boats out before the water begins to shimmer, markets empty before shade disappears. And by early afternoon, Qeshm does not slow. It stops, not from laziness, but from generational understanding that certain hours belong entirely to the sun. Life resumes in the evening with the intensity of a community that has learned to compress its existence into the margins the climate allows. Houses are oriented to capture the northwest wind. Walls are thick for thermal mass, not grandeur. Water is managed with a discipline that outlasts the scarcity that originally created it. Qeshm became this way through tectonic forces that offered its inhabitants almost nothing easily, and demanded, in return, a quality of attention that left no room for abstraction. Along Qeshm's northwestern shore, the village of Laft rises from the water in a configuration that suggests it was built not so much on the land as against it. Stacked houses of coral stone and mud brick pressing close together, with a skyline interrupted at irregular intervals by the vertical forms of Badgir wind towers. Their open mouths oriented toward the prevailing breeze with a precision that no instrument guided. These structures, some more than 1,000 years old, are the region's solution to a problem that no modern engineering first solved. How to make the interior of a building survivable when the exterior air reaches 122 degrees Fahrenheit and conventional ventilation is impossible. For the families who live within the shadow of these towers, their function is neither historical nor decorative. The towers work. They channel cooler air from above, roof level downward, through a system of internal baffles, producing an interior temperature differential of 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit without electricity, without machinery, and without maintenance beyond the periodic repair of their mud brick channels. This is not a primitive technology awaiting improvement. It is a perfected one, evolved through centuries of iteration by communities for whom failure meant heat death. Laft's 366 ancient wells tell a parallel story, a water management system designed so that each well was used only once per year in rotation, preserving freshwater reserves in an environment that generated almost none of its own. This level of systemic thinking, embedded in village infrastructure, is not romantic ingenuity. It is the outcome of survival pressure sustained over generations. In the boatyards along the coast of Kish and the Hormuz coast, men build ocean-going wooden vessels, using a method that has no written form. The Lenge. A traditional Persian Gulf wooden boat capable of carrying cargo across open water, recognized by UNESCO as an element of intangible cultural heritage. Is constructed entirely from the accumulated spatial memory of its builders passed from father to son through demonstration and repetition rather than specification and diagram. The curves of the hull, the angle of the keel, the placement of each structural member is held not in paper but in hands. That have felt the wood enough times to understand what it will do under stress at sea. For the men who build Lenge, this process is not an act of cultural preservation. It is a trade. The vessels are intended to work, to carry weight, to survive the Gulf's seasonal storms and navigate its shallow coastal waters. The fact that the knowledge required to build them exists nowhere except in the bodies of a diminishing number of craftsmen is not something that registers as a crisis until the number becomes too small to sustain. The Lenge tradition developed in response to the Gulf's trading geography. Vessels designed specifically for its depth profiles, its wind patterns, and the cargo networks that once connected Hormuz to ports across the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese documented their construction in the 16th century. They are still being built today by the same method. The current threat is institutional. New international maritime safety standards require certifications. That traditional wooden vessels cannot easily obtain, and the economic sanctions affecting Iran's trade networks have reduced the commercial viability of the craft significantly. On an island where summer temperatures make the outdoors a genuinely hostile environment, and where centuries of maritime trade brought cultures from across the Indian Ocean into sustained contact with local communities, the women of Hormuz developed a form of dress that is among the most immediately striking in the Gulf region, and among the most consistently misunderstood. Their garments are dense with embroidered color, deep gold, cobalt, and crimson, applied to fabric in patterns that hold specific regional and familial meaning, worn as a direct visual contrast to the austere aesthetic of more inland Islamic dress traditions. Above this, the Borugay mask, a structured face covering of embroidered fabric or leather, covering the nose and eyes, while leaving the lower face exposed. Functions simultaneously as sun protection, identity marker, and social signal. For the women who wear the borugay, it is not a symbol of constraint. Its original function was environmental. The Gulf sun, reflected off salt water, creates a level of UV exposure that, without protection, damages the skin severely over a lifetime of outdoor work. The mask developed as a practical barrier, covering the most exposed facial surfaces. Over generations, its form became codified. The pattern and construction of a woman's Borugay communicates her marital status, regional origin, and, in some communities, her family lineage. It became a text legible to those who knew how to read it. The Borugay is now endangered, not by repression, but by the quiet retreat of the knowledge that gives it meaning. Younger women in coastal towns increasingly choose alternatives. The craftswomen who produce the masks represent a practice with fewer practitioners each decade. Places like Hormuz remind us that what looks from outside like aesthetic tradition is often, from inside, a technology of survival shaped over time into something that carries more than its original function. Accessible only by sea, set against the dramatic fjord landscape of the Musandam Peninsula on the Omani side of the strait. Approximately 25 miles from the Iranian coast across open water, the village of Kumzari occupies a position of such geographic isolation that it developed something almost no other place on Earth possesses. A language that belongs to nowhere else. Kumzari is a spoken tongue constructed from fragments of Persian, Arabic, Portuguese, Hindi, and several other languages accumulated across centuries of contact with passing traders, sailors, and occupiers who passed through the strait without staying. It is, in linguistic terms, a fossil record of the Gulf's entire commercial history. Compressed into the daily speech of a few hundred people on a cliff above the sea. For the residents of Kumzari, their language is not a curiosity. It is how they think. The village's physical isolation, reachable in summer by a boat journey of roughly an hour from the nearest road, and occasionally inaccessible during periods of rough water, has historically protected both the community and its language from the homogenizing pressures that dissolved similar linguistic hybrids elsewhere. Every summer, when temperatures in the enclosed bay rise to levels that make the village temporarily uninhabitable, the entire community relocates together. maintaining a collective migration pattern that has likely been in practice for centuries. Kumzari became this way through the strait's role as a transit corridor. Every civilization that passed through left traces in the vocabulary of those who watched them go. The current threat is generational. Younger Kumzaris increasingly move to Qeshm or Muscat for work and education. And the conditions of modern connectivity, when they reach isolated places, tend to dissolve what isolation preserved. Places like Kumzari remind us that language is not just a means of communication, but a record of every force that shaped the people who speak it. The Strait of Hormuz is a place that, by any rational accounting of comfort or predictability, should not sustain the life it does. A corridor too narrow for the weight it carries, an island too mineral strange for conventional agriculture, a sea too hot for the coral that nonetheless grows within it, and a set of communities too isolated, too exposed, and too pressured by forces entirely beyond their control to have produced what they have produced. Languages assembled from the ruins of passing empires, architectural systems that cool stone buildings without electricity, food cultures drawn directly from the geology underfoot, and a knowledge of the sea so precise that it was never written down because it did not need to be. As the world moves into a future defined less by stability than by pressure, by heat, by resource scarcity, by the collapse of certainties that were always more fragile than they appeared. Hormuz begins to feel not like an edge case, but like a preview, a place where the conditions that the rest of the world is only beginning to confront have been the ordinary terms of existence for centuries. The people who live here did not wait for the crisis to begin learning how to endure it. And the question that this place leaves open quietly, without instruction, is whether we are paying attention. This is not a story that ends at the strait. Across the world, there are places shaped by the same logic. Places that have always known what stability was never promised to anyone. And places that suggest this journey has only just begun. Have you ever wondered how a single passage of water could become the hinge point of human history? It did not happen by accident. Tectonic forces folded the earth until the Persian Gulf narrowed into a single corridor 21 miles wide, positioned at the precise junction between east and west. For 5,000 years, whoever controlled this water controlled the world's breath. The Persians first. Then the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British. Then oil rewrote every calculation entirely. Every major power on Earth has a contingency plan for this strait. Every naval fleet in the region knows its coordinates by memory. Every oil market in the world moves when someone in a press briefing says its name. $21 million barrels a day. 1/5 of everything the modern world burns to stay alive. It does not see the 6,000 people living on a volcanic salt island with no groundwater, no arable soil, and no share in the trillion-dollar flow passing their windows every single day. How people live in the most strategically dangerous strait on Earth, and why the world has never bothered to ask. This is the story of the Strait of Hormuz, and of the people the world forgot to look at while it was watching the water. Hormuz Island sits at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, roughly 5 miles off the coast of southern Iran, where the Persian Gulf narrows into a choke point just 21 miles wide at its tightest passage. It is a small island, barely 8 miles across, yet its surface reads like a geological archive of 600 million years, compressed into visible bands of red ochre, sulfur yellow, deep violet, rusted orange, and chalky white that stripe the hillsides with a chromatic intensity that seems, at close range, to belong to a different atmosphere entirely. NASA has noted that the island's chemical composition resembles the surface of Mars more closely than almost anywhere else on Earth, a comparison that feels less like metaphor and more like literal fact when you stand on its ridgelines at midday. For the people who live here, this landscape is not unreal. It is everyday life. Women walk to the shoreline each morning to collect red earth from outcroppings of Golak iron oxide-rich soil, so concentrated that local cuisine incorporates it directly, mixed into fermented fish sauce, and spread onto flatbread as a morning meal. The geology does not remain outside the home. It enters the kitchen, the body, the daily rhythm of life, in a way that collapses the distance between environment and identity. Hormuz became this way through a mechanism called salt diapirism. Ancient Precambrian salt deposits, buried under immense pressure, slowly forced their way upward through the crust over hundreds of millions of years, dragging minerals, basalt, and iron compounds with them, rupturing the surface into this improbable palette. The island did not choose to look this way. It was pushed into it. Today, the arrival of tourists drawn by photographs of colored earth has introduced a new pressure foot traffic, informal mining of the very soil that defines the island, and infrastructure development at odds with the fragility of its surface. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is already being answered here, in the slow erosion of the thing that made it worth visiting. Places like Hormuz remind us that beauty without context is just color, and that the most extraordinary landscapes on Earth are often the ones most poorly equipped to survive our attention. Stars Valley lies in the interior of Qeshm Island, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, roughly 22 miles long and located just off Iran's southern coast in the Strait of Hormuz. The valley is not a valley in any conventional sense, but a labyrinthine network of eroded canyons and hollowed pillars carved from soft, sedimentary rock over thousands of years by the combined action of wind, rain, and the particular chemistry of the soil. Walls curve inward above narrow passageways, creating chambers that filter light into something dim and directional. The scale shifts constantly, passages narrow to shoulder width, then open without warning into vaulted spaces where the rock overhead has been sculpted into forms that appear almost intentional. For the people of Qeshm, the valley has never required scientific explanation. Local belief holds that the formations were shaped by falling meteorites, and that the valley retains something of the energy of that celestial contact. At night, residents describe the silence as absolute, broken only by wind moving through the passages in patterns that change with season and direction. The place is not visited for leisure, it is approached with a particular caution that acknowledges its difference from the surrounding landscape. The geology is, in fact, no less remarkable than the legend. Alternating layers of gypsum, sandstone, and salt have eroded at different rates, leaving behind structures that record geological time in visible cross-sections. A single wall face may contain strata representing tens of thousands of years of deposition. Today, Stars Valley receives visitors whose presence, however quiet, has begun to alter the silence that defines it. Trails cut through formations. Lights have been installed where darkness was the point. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is an ongoing negotiation between the valley's conditions and the world's desire to experience them safely. Places like Stars Valley remind us that some forms of meaning can only exist in the absence of explanation. Along the northern coast of Qeshm Island, the Hara Biosphere Reserve extends across approximately 35,000 acres of tidal mudflat and mangrove forest, a living system that has been operating continuously for 30 million years without interruption, without machinery, and without any dependence on the economies that surround it. The trees Avicennia marina, a species adapted to saltwater immersion, grow in dense stands that filter tidal salt through their root systems and excrete it through their leaves as fine white crystals, a biological desalination process that functions with a precision no industrial system has yet replicated at this scale. At low tide, the root networks emerge from the mud in complex aerial formations, engineering their own oxygen supply in an environment that provides almost none. For the fishing communities whose boats move through the narrow tidal channels between the trees, the forest is neither wilderness nor attraction. It is a navigational system, a weather buffer, a nursery for the fish species that define the local economy, and a shelter against the storm surges that periodically move through the strait. Knowledge of the forest's channels is practical knowledge, passed between generations, not as ecological education, but as survival geography. The Hara forest did not arrive here by chance. "30 million years of evolution along this coastline produced a species capable of living where salt, water, and fresh air meet, and where the ground disappears twice each day." That continuity has made this ecosystem one of the most stable in the Persian Gulf. Stable not because it is protected, but because it has spent 30 million years learning how not to fail. Today, rising sea temperatures are pushing the Gulf toward conditions that approach the upper tolerance threshold of the mangrove species. The forest does not respond to news cycles or conservation targets. It responds only to water temperature and tidal rhythm. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is less relevant here than what happens when the water it depends on becomes too warm to sustain it. Places like Hara remind us that the most durable systems on Earth are not the ones we built. They are the ones we have not yet managed to destroy. Dasht-e-Lut, the Desert of Emptiness, occupies a basin in southeastern Iran, extending across roughly 20,000 square miles of hyper-arid terrain at an elevation low enough and under a sky clear enough that it has recorded the highest land surface temperatures ever measured on Earth, in excess of 159 degrees Fahrenheit, confirmed by satellite data from NASA's MODIS system. The desert takes its extreme temperature not merely from sun and latitude, but from a combination of basin, geometry, low humidity, and complete absence of vegetation conditions that allow the ground surface to absorb and radiate heat without interruption. The center of the Lut is classified as one of the few places on Earth where nothing living has been confirmed to survive. Not bacteria. Not fungi. Not any organism yet identified. Surrounding this thermal core, however, the landscape shifts into something more complex. Yardang formations, elongated ridges, sculpted by sustained wind erosion over thousands of years, rise up to 150 feet from the desert floor in parallel rows that can extend for miles, creating a city-like geometry from entirely natural processes. The wind that made them continues to move through them, producing sounds that local nomadic groups who pass the desert's edges have described for centuries as voices. No permanent community lives inside the Lut. The caravans that once crossed its margins were routed around its hottest zones through route knowledge accumulated over generations and traded as carefully as any commodity. That routing knowledge, which paths held water, which landforms indicated shade, which stars corresponded to which wells, was survival infrastructure in the most literal sense. Today, the Lut is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which confers protection without resolving the question of what protection means in a place where the primary threat is not human activity, but the steady warming of the atmosphere above it. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is, in this case, almost irrelevant. The Lut's conditions remain largely incompatible with the kind of tourism that might otherwise alter them. Places like Dasht-e-Lut remind us that there are still territories on this planet where human ambition has not yet found purchase, and that their persistence is not a failure of development, but a record of limits we have not crossed. Along the southern coast of the Caspian Sea, pressed between the water and the Alborz mountain range in northern Iran, the Hercanian forest extends across approximately 850,000 acres of temperate broadleaf woodland that has survived, largely intact, for between 25 and 50 million years. It is one of the oldest continuously existing forest ecosystems on Earth, a fragment of the forest that once covered much of the temperate zone of the ancient world, before glacial periods contracted and shifted vegetation zones across the northern hemisphere. The Hercanian persisted through these changes because of an accident of topography. The Alborz range behind it blocked the cold air of the continental interior, and the Caspian in front of it maintained moisture levels sufficient to sustain broadleaf species that disappeared elsewhere in the region. The forest survived by being, in climatic terms, in exactly the right place. For the communities that have lived at its margins for millennia, the Hercanian is a resource system of extraordinary density. Wild fruit, mushrooms, medicinal plants, game, and timber in a landscape that receives annual rainfall several times higher than the arid interior of the same country. The contrast between this forest and the deserts less than 500 miles to its south is not merely striking, it is ecologically implausible, the result of mountain geometry rather than latitude. The Hercanian became this way by surviving what most similar forests did not: the Pleistocene glaciation, the subsequent aridification of West Asia, and several thousand years of human settlement at its edges. Its continuity is not natural abundance, it is the product of conditions that happened against probability to remain stable. Today, agricultural encroachment from the lowlands below and development pressure from the Caspian coast above are reducing the forest's edges. The interior remains largely intact, but the buffer zones that protect it from temperature and moisture fluctuation are narrowing. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is less relevant here than what happens when the climate corridor that has preserved it for 50 million years begins to shift. Places like the Hercanian remind us that the ancient world did not entirely disappear. Parts of it are still here, still functioning, still dependent on conditions we are only beginning to understand. On the eastern shore of Hormuz Island, a fortress built from the island's own red stone rises in partial ruin against the shoreline. Its walls, the same iron-saturated ochre as the cliffs behind it, so consistent in color with the landscape that from certain angles it appears less like a human construction and more like a geological formation that has taken on the approximate shape of a military installation. The Portuguese built it in 1507, following Alfonso de Albuquerque's seizure of the island as part of a strategy to control the strait's trading routes, a strategy that reduced the movement of goods between east and west to a single passage under Portuguese surveillance. For more than a century, the fortress was the physical embodiment of a commercial empire, a stone claim on the geometry of the world. For the people of Hormuz Island, the fortress has always been present in the landscape, neither celebrated nor resented with particular intensity, but absorbed into the island's longer timeline as one more layer deposited by a force that passed through, left its mark, and moved on. The stone came from the island. Eventually, the island is taking it back. The fortress became what it is now: partial ruin, slow dissolution, a wall here and an archway there, through the combined action of salt air, humidity, and the particular chemistry of the local stone, which is too mineral-rich to resist moisture indefinitely. An empire built its monument from a material it did not fully understand, and the material is quietly reclaiming itself. Today, the fortress receives visitors who photograph its archways against the red hillside. Preservation efforts are limited by funding and by the difficulty of stabilizing iron oxide-rich sandstone against a salt-laden coastal atmosphere. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal is, here, less urgent than what happens when the material from which empire made its claim proves unable to endure the conditions empire chose to ignore. Places like the Portuguese fortress remind us that every structure built to last forever is, in the end, on loan from the landscape it was taken from. Musandam does not announce itself gradually. It arrives without transition, a wall of limestone rising vertically from the water at the northern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, where the Hangam Mountains abandon their inland geometry and plunge directly into the Strait of Hormuz without apology or slope. The peninsula belongs to Oman, but shares no land border with the rest of the country, separated from the Omani mainland by a strip of UAE territory that makes Musandam, in administrative terms, an exclave, a piece of a nation that cannot reach itself by road. Geographically, politically, and in every atmospheric sense, it occupies a category of its own. The fjords known locally as khors were not carved by glaciers, as their Norwegian equivalents were, but produced by a different and older violence, the Arabian tectonic plate subducting beneath the Eurasian plate, causing the mountain range to fracture and sink at its seaward edge, allowing the Gulf to flood the resulting valleys to depths that charts still struggle to fully render. Walls of grey and ochre limestone rise several hundred feet from water, so still and dark in the inlet shadows that the surface reads as a continuation of the rock rather than a boundary between elements. The geometry is not picturesque in any comfortable sense. It is the geometry of entrapment. Beautiful, yes, but beautiful in the way of things that do not permit easy departure. For the people who live here, this landscape is not a spectacle. It is a set of conditions that determined everything, beginning with the question of where a house could be built at all. The Shihu people, the indigenous inhabitants of Musandam, constructed their villages on ledges and cliff faces at elevations that protected them from the seasonal storms moving through the strait and from the attention of the successive maritime empires that passed through the waters below. Their homes were not built in spite of the terrain, but from within its logic, positioned where the rock offered purchase, and the angle of the slope provided what passed in this landscape for shelter. Movement between villages was vertical as much as horizontal, and the knowledge of which passages through the rock were passable in which seasons was survival knowledge in the most unambiguous sense. The strait that isolated Musandam also placed it at the most strategically observed point in the Persian Gulf. Every supertanker entering or leaving the Gulf must navigate the shipping lanes that run through the core's approaches, threading between headlands where the water shallows and the channel narrows to corridors that leave almost no margin for error. From the cliff tops above, the scale of this passage is visible in a way that no chart conveys the tankers, each carrying more oil than some countries consume in a week, moving at the pace of slow thought through water flanked on both sides by rock. Their hulls within visual range of fishing douse a fraction of their size, the two vessels operating in the same physical space under entirely different understandings of what that space is for. It is one of the most concentrated expressions of the modern world's contradictions available to the unassisted eye. Beneath the shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz, in water that receives the shadow of supertanker hulls every few hours and sits at temperatures that exceed tolerance thresholds documented for coral systems almost everywhere else on Earth, something is growing that should not be growing. The coral reefs surrounding Hormuz Island have survived water temperatures consistently reaching and surpassing 35 degrees Celsius, conditions that trigger mass bleaching and mortality across the Indo-Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Red Sea. Here, they persist. The scientific community has not reached consensus on precisely why. The reefs themselves have not waited for the explanation. For the fishing communities that have worked these waters for generations, the reefs are not a biological phenomenon requiring explanation. They are the structure beneath the water that determines where the fish are, how the current moves, and where it is safe to anchor. Their condition registers first, as the presence or absence of the catch fisherman can identify reef degradation in the vocabulary of livelihood before marine biologists can document it in the vocabulary of science, because the fish disappear from the boat before the data appears in the journal. What the reefs represent to science is something rarer than beauty, a living record of what coral can become when forced, over millennia, to operate at the edge of its viable range, accumulating thermal tolerance through generations of survival rather than through any protection we provided. Today, coastal development, ship anchoring, and accelerating ocean temperatures are pushing even these adapted systems toward thresholds they may not clear. Seen from above, Hormuz looks like a fragment of color torn from the mainland and dropped into the middle of the Persian Gulf. Ochre-red cliffs, beaches streaked like a painter's overturned palette, a surface of water that throws sunlight back at the sky with almost aggressive intensity. But behind that dreamlike exterior is a community of real, living people, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 of them, concentrated mostly in the town on the island's northern edge, just 8 kilometers of open water from the coast of Bandar Abbas. This is not an island built for mass tourism, nor a place people come to in search of comfort. Hormuz is where people are born, grow up, grow old, and die inside a relationship with the sea that has never been optional. For generations, fishermen here have been pushing their boats out onto the turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf before the sun has fully risen. Their daily rhythm is not shaped by clocks or work schedules, but by tides, the same tides that have decided when to set out, when to return, and when to rest for hundreds of years running. In earlier times, when summer heat reached its most punishing extremes, many families would make the crossing to the mainland to sit out the worst months of the year. Today, most of the community stays year-round, adapting to the harsh conditions in the way that only people who have been attached to a place long enough can manage, not by overcoming nature, but by learning to live alongside it. Fishing has always been the backbone of Hormuz's economy, and that has not changed despite everything the outside world has done in the meantime. Wooden boats leave before dawn and come back, carrying shrimp, fish, and sometimes shark species drawn from the deeper waters around the strait. Fish are laid out to dry on net racks along the shoreline, the smell of salt and sea becoming so consistent a feature of the air that it stops registering as a smell and becomes simply the atmosphere of the place. Alongside fishing, the people of the island have gradually opened other paths toward a livelihood. Handicrafts have grown from whatever the island provides in abundance: mineral-rich red soil, shells, pieces of driftwood carried in on the current. Local art in particular has taken on new significance since the sculptor Ahmad Nadalian began transforming the island's beaches into open-air galleries, drawing a stream of visitors and creating a source of income that had not previously existed. Tourism has not replaced the sea. It has supplemented it, a balance that the people of Hormuz are managing carefully, aware that the two are not always easy to hold together. In the traditional social structure of Hormuz, men hold the formal position of authority. But it is women who carry the larger share of the daily labor that keeps households and communities alive. Together with their husbands, they bear the economic weight of the family, managing the home, raising children, and at the same time participating directly in the work of the shoreline drying nets, trading in small goods, producing handicrafts for sale. This is why the Borugay mask cannot be understood in isolation from its labor context. The women of Hormuz are not sitting in the shade waiting. They are outside, working under sunlight reflected off open water for decades at a stretch. The mask was their answer to that condition, practical, functional, and over time, transformed into something far more beautiful than its original purpose required. Their clothing makes the same statement in a different register. Deep gold, cobalt blue, and dark crimson are worked into elaborate hand embroidery that carries family and regional meaning, sewn into fabrics built for working life rather than ceremony. In an environment that is physically harsh and a daily life defined by labor, the women of Hormuz chose to exist in color as though that were the way they insisted on being seen by a landscape that is always trying to erase everything in it. The kitchen of Hormuz is the kitchen of a community that has spent centuries living at the world's crossroads. Fish, shrimp, and shark are prepared according to recipes passed down through oral tradition across generations, heavily spiced in the manner of the Indian Ocean basin, shaped by the influence of Indian merchants, East African port cities, and the many peoples who came through this island and left something of themselves behind in the food. But the most unusual element of Hormuz's cuisine comes not from the sea, but from the ground beneath it. The island's red soil, rich in iron oxide and dozens of other minerals, does not only produce the extraordinary landscape that draws visitors from across Iran. It is not only the material that local artists use to paint and sculpt. People here use it to color certain traditional dishes. Hormuz is one of the very few places on Earth where the community genuinely incorporates the soil of their homeland into what they eat, not out of scarcity or necessity, but because it has always been part of a culinary tradition that the island treats as worth keeping. The best way to eat on Hormuz is not to look for a restaurant, because there are almost none. People who come to the island are typically invited into family meals, eating with the people who live there, staying in their homes, sitting by the water in the evening when the heat finally concedes a few degrees and the wind moves in from the sea. Iran is a country the world believes it already understands. Yet beneath the image it has inherited lies a land that, by any modern measure of coherence, should not exist, as it does, held together not by stability but by 600 million years of geological pressure, by linguistic fossils that encode the passage of every empire to have moved through its waters, by communities who learn to eat the earth itself, to drum illness out of the body, to build into rock and rebuild after fire, sustaining a continuity of human presence in conditions that were never designed to make life easy or obvious. As the forces that once defined the margins, extreme heat, geographic isolation, resource scarcity, the slow encroachment of rising seas, move toward the center of the global experience, Iran begins to feel less like a country defined by its contradictions and more like a map of what the rest of the world is moving toward, a future in which adaptation is not a strategy but a condition, in which survival is not the exception but the daily premise of existence. This is not a story that ends here, because the forces that shape this land are not contained by any border, and the question of how human beings live within conditions they did not choose and cannot control continues, far beyond Iran, across every latitude where the world is being asked to reconsider what stability was ever worth believing in. For 5,000 years, whoever controlled this water controlled the world's breath. The Persians understood this first. Then came the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British. Then oil rewrote every calculation, and a corridor no wider than 21 miles became the most consequential passage on Earth. $21 million barrels of crude oil every single day. 1/5 of everything the modern world burns to stay alive, squeezed through a channel between a limestone coast that invites and a volcanic salt island that warns. "72 hours. That is how long the global economy survives if this passage closes." And yet, on the island that gives this strait its name, a woman wakes before the heat arrives to check how much water remains in the drum because the ferry may not come today. A fisherman reads the wind before anything else because the wind decides whether the island eats. An artist draws enormous figures across the red sand, knowing the tide will erase everything within hours, and draws them anyway. The world watches Hormuz and sees a choke point, a leverage point, a variable that every major power treats as permanent while knowing it is anything but. It does not see the 6,000 people living on a volcanic salt mass with no groundwater, no arable soil, and no share in the trillion-dollar flow passing their windows every single day. They have been here longer than every empire that ever tried to claim this water. Not because the land relented, but because they never required it to. This is Unreal Hormuz. Stretching between the southern coast of Iran and the northernmost tip of Oman's Musandam Peninsula, the Strait of Hormuz is, by any rational measure, one of the most improbable pressure points in human geography. At its narrowest, the usable navigation channel spans no more than 2 miles in each direction, a thread of open water suspended between clashing landmasses, between volcanic rock fractured by salt intrusions and sheer limestone bluffs carved by centuries of sea wind. The landscape does not look like a corridor. It looks like a wound. Yet, through this wound flows approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil every single day, roughly 1/5 of the world's total petroleum supply carried in the bellies of supertankers so vast they cannot be fully seen from shore. For the people who live here, this is not extraordinary. These vessels move past Hormuz Island the way weather moves past a cliff face, enormous, indifferent, and leaving almost nothing behind. The island itself sits at the northern edge of this passage like a sentry carved from the Earth's own fault lines, red and jagged against a sky that permits no softness. The true character of Hormuz cannot be understood from a single bank. It must be read from both shores simultaneously, because the strait is not one place. It is a confrontation between two entirely different relationships with the same water. On the southern edge, Oman's Musandam Peninsula rises from the sea in pale limestone columns, deeply fissured by fjords that reach inland like fingers, quiet and sheltered, a coastline that invites rather than repels. International tankers hug this southern corridor not only for the deeper water, but for the psychological comfort of its stillness. Musandam watches the strait the way a chess player watches a board, with patience, with calculation, and without urgency. To the north, Hormuz Island offers no such comfort. Here, the earth is not limestone, but volcanic salt, a mass of ancient geological compression forced to the surface over millions of years, oxidized by iron into the deep, unsettling red that gives the island its most persistent identity. The mountains do not invite. They confront. Where Musandam is smooth, Hormuz is fractured. Where Oman's shore suggests arrival, Hormuz suggests warning. And in the narrow water between them, 21 miles of the world's most consequential sea lane carries its daily cargo under the simultaneous gaze of two landmasses that agree on nothing except proximity. This is not a strait defined by what it connects. It is defined by what it divides and what it refuses to let pass without consequence. Camera low, moving across the flat rooftops of Hormuz village, dust-blown, vivid with pigment, and almost entirely empty of the wealth that surrounds them on every side. What happens when the world's most lucrative trade route passes directly in front of your door, and you are left with nothing but the smoke? For the residents of Hormuz Island, this question is not philosophical, it is the architecture of daily life. Every morning, the same supertankers that carry the financial heartbeat of industrialized civilization move through the water outside their windows. Every morning, the islanders wake to the same absence. No fresh water, no reliable employment, no access to the prosperity that glides past them on its way to somewhere else. The domed, rainbow-colored houses of the island's main settlement exist in permanent visual contradiction with their interiors, where the scarcity of water, income, and opportunity defines the rhythm of every household. The island sits on a mountain of volcanic salt, so saturated with minerals that no groundwater can form within it. Rain, the little that falls, evaporates before it can collect. Every drop of fresh water that enters a cup on Hormuz Island has arrived by ferry from the mainland port of Bandar Abbas, a journey dependent on weather, fuel, and the absence of mechanical failure. When the ferry is delayed, the island does not merely grow thirsty. It grows afraid. Men leave Hormuz regularly, crossing to the mainland, not to trade, not to travel, but to carry back plastic containers of water as though they were gold. There is a particular kind of beauty that belongs only to places that have no interest in being beautiful, places where the visual experience is a byproduct of geological violence rather than a deliberate arrangement. Hormuz Island belongs entirely to this category. The red beach that curves along its western edge owes its color not to any single mineral, but to a collision of iron oxides, sulfur deposits, and volcanic ash compressed over millions of years into a shoreline that appears, in full afternoon sun, to be actively bleeding. The water at its margins shifts from deep ultramarine to a rust-tinged red, where the mineral-laden sand dissolves at the waterline, a gradient that exists nowhere else on Earth, and that no photograph fully captures, because no photograph can convey the smell of iron in sea air or the sensation of walking on a surface that feels geologically recent rather than ancient. Inland, the Rainbow Valley, a canyon corridor where exposed rock layers cycle through ochre, white, violet, and burnt orange, reads less like landscape and more like stratigraphy made visible. The interior life of a planet turned outward for examination. The silver beach, glittering with mineral flakes under direct sunlight, is a trap in the most literal sense. The dark, heat-absorbing sand beneath the surface shimmer reaches temperatures capable of burning exposed skin within seconds. And in the tidal shallows on the island's quieter edges, Avicennia marina mangroves push upward from saltwater, filtering toxicity through their leaves and converting the inhospitable into habitat, performing the same metabolic miracle that the island's human residents have been performing for centuries. Not escaping the hostility of the environment, but transforming it, quietly and persistently, into the condition of life itself. The strait that carries 21 million barrels per day carries not only oil, it carries consequence. In the years following the intensification of international sanctions, a new phenomenon emerged in the waters off Hormuz. A fleet of tankers operating without transmitted identification, their AIS transponders switched off, their flags changed between ports, their ownership obscured behind layers of shell registration. These vessels, documented by maritime analysts and satellite tracking services under the collective designation of the Dark Fleet, do not pass through Hormuz invisibly. They simply pass through it unacknowledged, moving crude oil from sanctioned sources to willing buyers across a global network that has learned to exist in the gap between international law and economic necessity. From the shore of Hormuz Island, these ships look identical to any others. Their lights are the same. Their silhouettes are the same. The water they displace is the same water. But they represent a doubling of the strait's already extreme geopolitical load, a reminder that the 21 miles between Hormuz and Musandam are not merely a trade route, but a threshold, a point at which the entire architecture of global economic governance becomes visible in its limitations. Hormuz does not cause this. It simply reveals it, the way all narrow passages reveal what is being carried through them and, more importantly, what those carrying it are willing to risk. For a particular generation of young Iranians, Hormuz Island has become something that no government document designates and no official map acknowledges: a zone of relative freedom. The island's geographic distance from the administrative centers of the mainland, combined with its extreme physical conditions and its small, close-knit population, creates an environment in which certain social pressures, the dress codes, the behavioral surveillance, the structured visibility of urban life relax without formally dissolving. Young people from Tehran and Isfahan make the journey to Bandar Abbas and then to Hormuz, not despite the 50-degree heat and the absence of fresh water, but because of the transaction that heat and absence make possible. To sleep on volcanic rock under open sky, to exist without the architecture of social performance, to trade comfort for a version of autonomy that is not granted but simply provisionally available. This is what the island offers, that no resort, no hotel, and no curated destination can replicate. Artists come to Hormuz specifically to make work that will not last. Enormous compositions drawn in colored sand directly on the beach, executed in full knowledge that the tide will erase them completely within hours. This is not resignation. It is a philosophy articulated in practice, the recognition that impermanence, when accepted rather than resisted, becomes its own form of permanence. Hormuz has been understanding this for centuries. The mainland is still learning. Hormuz is not simply a contemporary strategic asset. It is a geological archive of imperial ambition, layered in the same strata as its iron oxide and volcanic salt. The island's name itself belongs to an earlier geography applied first to a mainland port city that flourished under the Seljuk Empire as a hub of Indian Ocean trade, then transferred to the island offshore when that city fell to invasion in the 14th century, and the surviving population relocated across the water and rebuilt. The island that received them was, in every physical sense, less hospitable than the city they had lost. They came anyway. Because the water they commanded from this position was worth more than the soil they left behind. The Portuguese arrived in 1507, recognized the strategic geometry of the strait within days of their first survey, and constructed the fort of Our Lady of the Conception, the ruins of which remain today, their coral and mud walls slowly dissolving back into the earth at a rate that the salt air accelerates each year. The Portuguese held Hormuz for over a century before being expelled by a combined Safavid British force in 1622, an alliance so unusual and so instrumental that it effectively restructured the regional balance of maritime power. After them came the Dutch. After the Dutch came the British. After the British came oil, and after oil came everything else. Each empire arrived certain it had discovered something permanent. Each empire left, having contributed one more layer to the geological record of this island, one more deposit of ambition, oxidized by time into the same dust that now settles on the windowsills of the people who were here before all of them, and who remain here still. What happens when a place becomes famous for being unreal? In the case of Hormuz Island, the answer is still being written, but its early chapters are already visible. The Rainbow Valley, once known primarily to the island's own residents and to a small number of Iranian domestic travelers, began appearing in international travel media with increasing frequency through the 2010s, documented in the kind of saturated, wide aperture photography that strips geological phenomena of their context and renders them as pure visual product. The influx of visitors that followed brought income to a community that desperately needed it, and disruption to an ecosystem that was not designed to absorb it. The salt formations that give the island its surreal color palette are, by their nature, fragile mineral deposits shaped over millions of years that can be dislodged by a boot heel, smeared by a hand, or chemically altered by the sunscreen and synthetic oils carried in tourist skin. The mangroves of the Hara protected zone face pressure from boat traffic. The nesting grounds of the hawksbill sea turtle, protected on nearby Shidvar Island, partly by the territorial behavior of its venomous snake population, are not immune to the consequences of increased human presence in adjacent waters. Hormuz is learning, in real time, the paradox that confronts every place whose unreality becomes its primary commercial value, that the recognition of beauty and the preservation of it are, more often than not, working in opposite directions at a pace that only becomes visible once significant damage has already been done. Before the supertankers, before the sanctions, before the satellite imagery and the geopolitical analysis and the energy security briefings that occupy the attention of governments on every continent, Hormuz was a fishing community. It remains one in the spaces that global consequence has not yet fully colonized. The men who operate the small wooden dhows from the island's harbor do not think about the 21 million barrels moving past them each day in any abstract policy sense. They think about it the way fishermen think about any large, regular disturbance to their working environment, as a source of wake turbulence that affects net deployment, as a source of fuel contamination that periodically renders certain fishing grounds temporarily unviable, and as a source of acoustic interference that displaces the pelagic fish populations whose behavioral patterns they have spent lifetimes learning to read. The fishing grounds of the Strait of Hormuz are, beneath the surface noise of geopolitics, among the most biologically productive in the Persian Gulf, fed by the nutrient upwelling generated by the density difference between the saltier surface water flowing out of the Gulf and the cooler, less saline water of the Gulf of Oman flowing in at depth. This circulation, the same oceanographic mechanism that creates the strait's complex current patterns and makes navigation challenging for vessels without sophisticated equipment, is what feeds the fish, and therefore what feeds the fishermen, and therefore what has sustained Hormuz Island as a human settlement through every empire, every conflict, and every geopolitical reconfiguration of the past 5 centuries. The supertankers move through the same water. The fish do not recognize their authority. The fishermen understand this, and they continue to lower their nets in the hours before dawn, reading the water the way their grandfathers read it, not as a stage for the drama of global power, but as a working surface, difficult and generous in equal measure, and entirely indifferent to anything that does not swim. There is an hour on Hormuz Island, in the 40 minutes before sunset during the summer months, when the relationship between the light, the mineral content of the shore, and the salt particles suspended in the sea air combines to produce a visual experience that has no adequate prior reference point. The iron oxide in the soil and sand catches the lowering sun at an angle that intensifies its red wavelength while filtering the blue, turning the ground beneath your feet from ochre to something approaching arterial. The water in the shallows, already tinted by mineral runoff, shifts toward a color that exists at the boundary between rose and rust, a color that appears in no standard vocabulary of natural description because it has no standard natural occurrence outside of this specific island at this specific hour. Photographers who have documented this phenomenon consistently report the same experience, that no post-production adjustment makes the images look more accurate, because the images, even unmanipulated, do not look real. This is not a failure of photographic technology. It is a failure of the category of real to accommodate what Hormuz actually produces when conditions align. The island does not perform this for visitors. It performs it whether anyone is watching or not. The same light on the same red earth at the same angle each evening. A geological spectacle maintained across millions of years with complete indifference to the human impulse to witness, document, or explain it. The people who live here do not gather to watch the sunset. They are inside, managing the final preparations of the evening meal, checking the water stores, listening to whether the wind has shifted. The beauty of Hormuz is, in the most precise sense, not for them. They live inside it. That is a different thing entirely. Every place that matters globally eventually generates a question that it cannot answer for itself, a question that its existence poses to the world outside it, and that the world outside it has not yet found the language to address. Hormuz's question is this: how long can a civilization continue to root its most fundamental dependencies through a passage 21 miles wide, controlled by no single authority, contested by multiple competing powers, and physically located on one of the Earth's most geologically and climatically unstable coastlines, before the fragility of that arrangement becomes its defining characteristic rather than an acceptable risk. It has a mathematical dimension, the 7-2-hour calculation, the insurance premium applied to every barrel that transits this water, the fuel surcharges embedded in the price of manufactured goods worldwide that reflect in small fractions the cost of the Hormuz risk factor. But it is also a philosophical question, and the island itself is, in some sense, its most honest answer. Hormuz Island has never resolved its fragility. It has never engineered its way to security, never achieved the water independence that would make the ferry delay non-catastrophic, never developed the soil that would make the Larak harvest unnecessary for basic nutrition, never arrived at a condition that could be described as stable by the standards the modern world applies to that word. It has simply continued absorbing instability, incorporating it into culture, building systems of mutual support and distributed resilience that function not by eliminating risk, but by distributing it so widely across the community that no single failure is fatal. This is not a model that development economists usually recommend. But it is the model that has worked here across every empire and every disruption for longer than most modern states have existed. And the strait keeps asking whether the rest of the world is paying attention. Qeshm is the largest island in the Persian Gulf, stretching roughly 84 miles in length and lying so close to mainland Iran that in some areas the channel between them narrows to less than 2 miles. Within the island lies an unusually complete and exposed geological record, where moving across the terrain can feel less like traveling and more like reading. As if erosion has deliberately opened the landscape to reveal the processes that shaped it. The Valley of Stars, known locally as Larak, consists of eroded mudstone formations sculpted over millennia by wind and episodic flash floods. Its columns, ridges, cavities, and overhangs are so varied and irregular that the eye continuously searches for patterns but fails to find any coherent system. The landscape is not dramatic in the way volcanoes or glaciers are. Its strangeness comes from deep time, slow, cumulative, and entirely indifferent to observation. Chaku Canyon, formed by a seasonal watercourse active only during short periods of intense flooding each year, cuts through layers of sedimentary rock that record climatic shifts over tens of millions of years. Each layer carries a distinct color, like separate chapters of a geological narrative displayed simultaneously along the canyon walls. In its narrowest sections, the walls are close enough to touch with both hands, while the strip of sky above is reduced to a thin ribbon of light. This creates a naturally cool interior environment, even when surface temperatures exceed 105 degrees Fahrenheit, a form of thermal regulation achieved without design, energy, or maintenance. For the people of Qeshm, this geological complexity is neither spectacle nor obstacle. It is simply the environment in which daily life unfolds. Traditional Bandari architecture, with thick walls, deep shade, and orientation toward prevailing sea breezes rather than outward views, reflects centuries of adaptation to extreme heat, where every structural choice is ultimately a thermal one. Historically, the island's residents have depended on fishing and, in earlier centuries, pearl diving when oyster populations supported a regional economy. More recently, Qeshm's designation as a free trade zone has introduced manufacturing, fuel re-export, and cross-strait commerce, particularly in the island's eastern region. Today, Qeshm exists in a visible internal tension. Its western side remains a largely untouched geological wilderness, increasingly visited for that very quality, while its eastern side reflects industrial and economic ambition. Both realities coexist, and neither shows any sign of yielding to the other. The Musandam Peninsula extends southward from mainland Oman as a geographic exclave, physically separated from the rest of the country by the United Arab Emirates. Its coastline along the western entrance to the Strait of Hormuz presents a landscape so unexpected that early systematic photographs, taken in the mid-20th century, were reportedly met with skepticism by those unfamiliar with the region. The coastline is defined by a series of drowned valleys, ancient river systems that once carved through limestone when sea levels were significantly lower, then gradually flooded as waters rose after the last glacial maximum. The result is a network of fjord-like inlets, known locally as khors, where steep cliffs rise sharply from dark, still water. In calm conditions, the reflections are so precise that the boundary between rock and water nearly disappears. Musandam's rock faces also offer an unusually accessible geological record. Marine fossils, remnants of organisms that once lived in shallow seas, can now be found more than a mile above present sea level. These formations were lifted through the long-term collision between the Arabian and Eurasian tectonic plates, a process that continues today. Although imperceptible in the moment, this movement accumulates over time, producing dramatic vertical shifts that place ancient seabeds at mountain heights and create the sense of standing within an ongoing geological process. The communities that have historically inhabited Musandam's cores, particularly the Shihu people, have developed ways of life shaped by the constraints and opportunities of this environment. Fishing in sheltered waters, traveling primarily by boat between inlets, and forming distinct material cultures tied to local resources are all part of this adaptation. Despite their close physical proximity, individual communities remained relatively isolated, allowing for noticeable cultural variation, mirroring the peninsula's geological tendency to fragment and evolve independently. Located roughly 12 miles east of Hormuz Island, Hangam Island can only be reached by boat, a journey slow enough to strip away expectations before arrival. What emerges is a stark visual contrast. Where Hormuz burns in deep red, Hangam reflects light in near total white. Not the worn-out white of overused beaches, nor the artificial perfection of resort coastlines, but a natural brightness formed from fine sediment layered with microscopic mica. These particles, invisible on their own, combine into a surface that refracts sunlight in shifting tones. Silver one moment, gold the next, depending entirely on the angle of light and the observer's position. The surrounding waters are unusually clear, shallow, and warm conditions that only persist where seabeds remain undisturbed and currents move gently enough to preserve what lies beneath. Beneath the surface, Hangam shelters one of the few remaining coral reef systems in the Persian Gulf that has not been extensively degraded by shipping activity, anchor damage, rising temperatures, or coastal runoff. Pods of dolphins still move through these waters in numbers that suggest something unusual, an ecosystem not yet fully synchronized with the disruptions that have reshaped much of the surrounding region. Life on Hangam revolves around fishing, guided by knowledge passed down long before modern borders defined these waters. The island's distinct character is not accidental. Its limestone geology resisted the iron-rich mineral deposits that colored Hormuz, while its relative distance from the main tanker routes allowed marine life to persist with less disturbance. But that separation is narrowing. Each year, global shipping traffic inches closer, vessels grow larger, routes more crowded, and the physical impact on the surrounding waters increasingly difficult to ignore. Hangam remains intact for now, but the forces reshaping the region are no longer distant. Hormuz Island is a place that, by any modern accounting of habitability, should not sustain the life. It does a volcanic salt mass with no groundwater, no arable soil, and no buffer against the geopolitical forces that swirl through the 21 miles of water it overlooks. Yet, it does sustain life and has done so for centuries. Not through the resources the world normally associates with survival, but through a form of accumulated intelligence so embedded in daily practice that it no longer registers as extraordinary to those who carry it. The island's persistence is not a miracle. It is a methodology, patient, adaptive, and built on the recognition that permanence is not a condition to be achieved, but an illusion to be abandoned in favor of something more durable, the capacity to absorb disruption and continue. As climate pressure compresses the boundaries of what the world considers livable, and as the energy dependencies that the Strait sustains begin their long, contested transition towards something less certain, Hormuz becomes less an anomaly and more an anticipation, a place that has already been practicing for a future the rest of the world is only beginning to imagine, where water is rationed, where architecture negotiates with heat, where beauty and danger occupy the same coordinates, and where identity is shaped not by what the land provides, but by what it refuses to. This is not a story that belongs to one island alone. Across the world, there are places that have always lived within the conditions that modernity is only now approaching, and this journey through the unreality of what endures does not end here.